Hello and welcome to Upstack America's Oracle EBS Financials Functional Training. My name is Bob and I'm the lead senior consultant for Upstack America. And with me today I have Victor, who is also a senior consultant. And today we are handling lesson 5 of the SLA. And Victor, please walk us through.
Thank you, Bob, for the introduction, and welcome everybody to this session in our financials functional training. As Bob said, this is lesson 5 of SLA module. And in this session, we are going to just do an overview of what we have covered so far. We have looked at the various components of SLA module. By now, you should have an idea of what each component does, or what its purpose is, and where it falls in the hierarchy that we have talked about. So we talked about the features individually. So now we want to see how the big picture comes together, okay? So that after this, we will be able to comfortably go and start working on this module on the instance. So just as a reminder, these are some of the features that we have talked about, or these are some of the components that we have talked about in SLA. Like I said, by looking at this screen, you should be able to tell what each feature is, where it falls, what it does in terms of creating accounting, because the purpose of SLA module is that it creates accounting for all the subledger modules. So starting with the accounting method, we know that the SLA accounting method is what we attach to our ledger, and therefore it becomes our accounting convention. Examples of accounting methods, we have talked about accrual, we have also talked about cash. So basically, the accounting method defines what accounting convention you're using for your setup, okay? Your accounting method comprises many application accounting definitions, and the application accounting definitions are what dictates how accounting is created for every subledger module, okay? So receivables will have its own application accounting definition. Payables will have its own application accounting definition. We talked about event entities, class, and types, and how they are related to each other. The other thing that we said is that these are predefined components, okay? These are predefined components in the SLA module, and it is what we base our configurations around. Examples of event entity could be an invoice. If you go down to event class, it could be credit memos, debit memos, standard invoices. Event types are what? Creation of an invoice, payment of an invoice, canceling an invoice, that's an event type. And we can say that at the lowest level, that is what we usually create accounting for, or that is what we can base our configurations around. When you validate an invoice, for example, that's an event for which accounting can be created, because that is something that it affects the balances, if we can put it that way. Something that can be reflected in an accounting sense by showing which balances or which accounts are affected, okay? The other thing we need to remember is that for each event type, a journal entry is created. Using an example, when you validate an invoice and create accounting, a journal entry is created. One journal is created. Journal line definitions are what dictate how accounting is created for this event type. So in terms of relation is you will have an event type, all right? And then now that event type will have a journal line definition associated with it, which now dictates how the accounting will be created for that event type. So invoice creation, for example, can have its own journal line definition that dictates how accounting is created, such as what journal lines will be used, among other things. Let's go down to journal entry descriptions. Journal entry descriptions can be part of journal line definitions, or we can also think them as separate entities which we can attach to an event type. The entry descriptions that we attach to the event type are usually assigned at the header level. Okay, so when you create a journal, it will have a description at the header level. Okay, and it will also have a description at the line level for each line. So journal entry descriptions can be attached at the line level and at the header level. At the header level, they are associated with the event type. At the line level, they are associated with the line type. Journal line types dictate how the lines in your journal will be created. They dictate whether, for example, that line will be a debit or credit line. They also dictate other things such as the type of balance. Is it an actual balance or is it a budget balance? Level of summarization for that line will also be dictated by the configurations that you make at the line type level. Account derivation rules, as we have said before, are associated with the line type, because for each line, of course, you will have each line will be associated with an account combination, and it is the account derivation rules that contain the logic which dictates which account will be produced for that particular line. And we have seen there are various ways that we can configure the derivation rules logic to dictate how they obtain those values. And they can obtain those values as a whole combination of the accounting flex field, or as individual values for each segment. All right. Finally, we talked about mapping sets. It is important to emphasize that mapping sets are an optional feature, but they help us to define more complex logic that helps us to derive our accounts. So you can use a mapping set and attach it to your account derivation rules. It will contain the logic that will help to come up with that particular account. So that's just a short explanation of each of these features. Again, I emphasize, remember how all of them are related to each other and what they do. And the other thing that will maybe can help you to remember is what each one does in terms of the final object. What do I mean? So like the journal line type, what does it affect? It affects the line in the journal. Account derivation rules, it affects the account that will be displayed for that particular line. Journal line definitions affects how the journal will come out as a whole. Okay, so think about those elements, and it will for sure help you to get a very clear understanding of SLA module and these components. This is also a diagrammatic representation of what we have just talked about, again, to just help us understand how all these features are related. Okay, so you can come and look at this slide, and it will help you to remember and make the relations between each of these components. So we attach our sub-ledger accounting method to our ledger. Okay, we know that the sub-ledger accounting method will contain application accounting definitions for all the sub-ledger modules that are being used in that installation or that instance of Oracle. Remember that event types are predefined. Okay, event classes, event entities, event types, all these are predefined components, but these are the features around which we define how we want our accounting to be created. Journal entry descriptions will be associated with event types, because we know for each event type a journal is created. Okay, and so a description will be attached for that event type at the header level. So once we have our event type, okay, then that event type will have the journal line definition, and which basically dictates how the accounting is created for that particular event type. Within the journal line definition, we will have line types, we'll have account derivation rules, and we'll also have descriptions. Okay, line types dictate how the lines for the journal will be created. All right, line types are associated with descriptions because you can have a description for each line that is created in your journal. And of course, line types will also be associated with derivation rules, which dictate for that line type how is the account derived for that line type. And of course, we have these mapping sets, which are an optional feature that you can use to do what? To define logic for account derivation rules. Keep in mind also the kind of relationship in terms of number. Okay, so your ledger will only have one sub-ledger accounting method, which is your accounting convention, right? So you can only attach one sub-ledger accounting method. If you want to use two conventions, then maybe you can create a secondary ledger, which you can attach a different accounting convention or a different accounting method. We talked about secondary ledgers in our GL module, so you can see that all these topics are related and they come together nicely, right? So this is why you would want to create a secondary ledger, because you want to use more than one sub-ledger accounting method. So maybe for one ledger you want to have accrual, and then the other one you want to have cash. So one sub-ledger accounting method will have multiple application accounting definitions, because you'll have multiple sub-ledger modules. Of course, your event types, you'll have multiple event types because there are different types of transactions, right? For example, invoice in AP, if you're dealing with AP, for example, you'll have creating invoices, that's an event type. You'll have canceling invoices, that's another event type. And all those other kinds that we'll talk about or we can think about, okay? If we have multiple event types, then it means you'll have many journal line definitions, because each journal line definition is associated with each event type, okay? Of course, each journal line definition will have multiple line types, because you can have different kind of lines. You can have an expense line, you can have a liability line, you can have a tax if you are using EB tax. You can have a freight line, okay? So those are the kind of lines that you can encounter. Account derivation rules, we also talked about why you might have multiple account derivation rules attached to a line type, but you can also have one account derivation rule for a single line type, okay? So here it can be one-to-many or one-to-one. And then for mapping sets, it will depend also maybe for the number of account derivation rules that you have. All right. So by now you should have a very clear understanding of this whole SLA module and the features that it contains and what they do. So if you forget, you can always come and remind yourself and just keep in mind the relation, and it will become like second nature to you. So of course, the reason why we are talking about all this is because we want to go into the system and work on these features and see how the changes we make affect how accounting is created, right? So when you install or when you purchase your suite of applications, Oracle, it will come with seeded components, all right? So all the way down, all these subledger accounting components will have those which will come with your installation, and we say that those are owned by Oracle. So the ownership is they are owned by the by Oracle. So actually you cannot make any changes to those components which are owned by Oracle, right? So if you cannot make any changes to those components, so how can you modify them to suit your needs, or how can the company modify them to suit their accounting needs, how they want the accounting to be created? The way we do that is that we copy those Oracle-owned components. Once we copy them, that copy becomes owned by the user, all right? And therefore, the user can make modifications to that copy to suit their own needs of how they want the accounting to be created for their own purposes, all right? The reason why this setup is like this is because, one, these seeded components, the way they are configured, they can meet a lot of the needs of many companies. So some companies will not need to modify any of these components because the seeded ones can meet their needs. All right. Also, Oracle can make upgrades or patches to these components. All right. If there's a problem with these components, Oracle will make upgrades to remove those problems. For example, if there are errors or something like that. And these upgrades usually affect the Oracle-owned components. Okay. So if Oracle had allowed you to modify these Oracle-owned components, and then they do an upgrade to these components, then the changes that you make could be overwritten, and then you'll have to make those changes all over again. So that's very inconvenient. However, the ones that you have cloned and modified are not usually affected by these upgrades that Oracle might do. So whatever changes happen in these seeded components will not affect these user-owned components because the ownership is indicated as user. All right. So keep that in mind. If we want to make any modifications to these features, we have to first clone them or copy them, make a copy of them, and then now we can make whatever changes we want to those components, and then they will create accounting the way we want it to be created or according to the user needs. All right. So I'd say that is the end of the theory part of SLA. From now, we should be ready to go into the system and look at each of these components and make changes and see how they affect the working of the system. At the moment, we have covered one subledger module, which is AP. So that is what we are going to focus on. So the application accounting definition that we are going to focus on is the one for payables. All right. And therefore, all these features downstream will also belong to payables, and they will affect accounting for payables. All right. The overall concept is the same in terms of the event types, the journal line definitions, what they are, and the purpose that they serve for the other subledger modules. But since we are familiar with AP, that's what we are going to be using for our demonstrations and our examples. As we cover more modules, maybe we'll take a small look at each of these components for the other modules. But for now, we are going to deal with AP. Anyway, so that's the overview that we wanted to cover for this session. Make this slide your friend for the SLA module. Basically shows everything, or we can say almost everything, and you should have a good understanding if you understand this slide. Anyway, Bob, unless you have something to add, we can end this session there.
All right, thank you.